Okay, thanks everybody. And I want to thank Senators Klobuchar, Merkley, and Peters for joining me today. Well, we're here to discuss an emerging theme from President Trump's presidency that's sadly been on display yet again this week: his failure to deliver, to actually deliver for the middle class. It's a plain fact. The president talks the talk. He talks a pretty good talk, but fails time and time and time again to walk the walk. The Trump administration has left behind a trail of broken promises, example after example where this president fails to deliver for the middle class despite all his verbiage. He's dropped the ball for the middle class on health care, on trade, on prescription drugs, on draining the swamp, on infrastructure. On each issue, he said he'd do something, and on each issue, he failed to keep that promise, usually succumbing to the powerful special interests. Many Democrats have actually agreed with a number of President Trump's campaign promises. We want him to be tough on China. Instead, he appears to be backing off and allowing China to evade the consequences of rapaciously stealing American know-how and intellectual property. He even pledged to help a Chinese telecom company guilty of violating U.S. sanctions that presents a real security risk to our country. We wanted him to work with Democrats to drain the swamp and bring more accountability and transparency to government. Instead, the President Trump has filled his government with industry lobbyists, rich executives with sprawling conflicts of interest, many of whom have engaged in flagrant graft, enjoying luxuries on the taxpayer dime. His administration hardly even vets candidates. The swamp has been made much deeper and stinkier under President Trump than it has ever been before, despite his promises. We Democrats wanted to work with the president on a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Instead, after waiting a year, his detailed infrastructure plan wasn't even close to $1 trillion and predicated on the installation of new tolls from one end of the country to the other. We wanted to work with the president to bring down the alarming cost of prescription drugs. Instead, he released a proposal last week so good for the drug lobby that stock prices of the pharmaceutical industry soared after he gave his speech. And we Democrats wanted to work with the president to fulfill his promise to deliver more affordable health care for the American people. Instead, since the president took office, he and Republicans have worked day in, day out to systematically dismantle our health care system, sending premiums skyrocketing for millions of Americans. In state after state, we're beginning to see the results of the president's sabotage of our health care system. Put simply, Democrats stand ready to work with the president on these issues. He just needs to drop letting the right wing of the party call the shots. He needs to roll up his sleeves and keep promises made to middle-class families in this country. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Schumer. I wanted to focus on one of those promises, and that is the promise to actually do something about pharmaceutical prices. And I was eager to hear the president's speech. As you know, there is some bipartisan work that's gone on drug prices in the Senate. But instead, what I heard was really nothing that would move the ball. Here's what we saw. We not only saw the stocks go up, but the Wall Street Journal had a headline that I thought really summed it up well. Drug industry relieved by price proposal. That was it, and that's what happened, and that's why the stocks went up. So during the campaign, the president actually said that the drug companies were getting away with murder. His words, not mine. So I spent this Mother's Day weekend with a number of families who had actually lost their kids because of pharmaceutical prices. In fact, I was on the steps of our state capitol with a mom whose son, Alec Rayshawn Smith, died last year at age 26 from diabetes. He was a manager of a restaurant, loved by his family, and the insulin had gone up to $1,300 a month. And by the way, he is not alone. The price of insulin has tripled during the last decade. A tried and true drug, insulin, has tripled. So this young man was rationing insulin. He was taking less than he was supposed to save money. Just like the senior from rural Minnesota that I talked to, who keeps some of the insulin at the bottom of each syringe so she can use it for the next day. That is what's going on in the greatest country on earth. That is what's happening right now. And so what I expected to hear from him was, number one, something he promised during the campaign, negotiation of prices under Medicare. In the law right now, it bans 41 million seniors from negotiated prices under Medicare. We now have 34 senators on our bill that I am leading that would remove that ban. That makes sense. And he has been for it, but he didn't propose it. And in fact, the day before put out there that they weren't going to propose it. Secondly, pay for delay. This is something that Senator Grassley and I have worked on for years, where basically the big pharmaceutical companies are paying off the generics to keep their products off the market. That's pure competition, American dream, competition. But what's happening? $3 billion a year we would save of taxpayers' money, probably the same amount for consumers, because this practice is allowed to continue. Senator McCain and I have a bill to allow for less expensive drugs to come in from Canada. As I say, we can see Canada from our porch in Minnesota, and we really like those prices. But instead, we get a firm no. So this has been happening again and again, and it is time. If the president really wants to show leadership and show that Washington isn't owned by the pharma companies, he had his moment. He didn't seize it, but we're still waiting. The proposals they made, some of them were okay, but they're clearly not going to move us in the direction, because the only person relieved by this were the pharma companies, not the people of America. Thank you.
Good job. Jeff Merkley.
Well, here's another promise that President Trump made, and that was more affordable, higher quality health care for all. And that's certainly a broken promise. First, we saw a whole series of versions of bills designed to rip health care from 22 to 30 million Americans last year. And I thank John McCain for helping drive a stake through the heart of those proposals. But that didn't stop President Trump. He turned to his executive powers. He shortened the application period. He got rid of the advertising. He proceeded to damage the ability of facilitators to assist people to sign up. He introduced junk plans, and the list goes on. So he sabotaged the health care program at point after point after point. He blocked reinsurance. He broke or ended the individual mandate. And all along, the experts said all of these things are going to drive up the cost of health insurance premiums for Americans. Not lower them, drive them way up. The only thing healthy about Trump's plan is that it's healthy price increases, and not healthy as in happy, but healthy as in huge. So here we are. We have the results now from Virginia and Maryland. We have a subsidiary of Care First, a 64% increase in Virginia. Cigna up 6.4 to 40% on different plans. Care First Blue Choice up 26% plus. Kaiser up 32%. Is it just Virginia? No, let's look at Maryland. Maryland, Care First, a 91.4% increase on their PPO plan. We have Kaiser, a 35% increase. Overall, a 30% increase. So what is happening is exactly what we predicted. The president's war on health care for working Americans is going to damage the availability of health care for millions and millions of ordinary, hard-working Americans. It is absolutely unacceptable, and it is certainly a profoundly broken promise.
Senator Peters. Good job, Jeff.
I want to talk about another promise that President Trump has forgotten about, in fact, has abandoned. It's an issue that is front and center in the state of Michigan. As we are in the springtime now and the thaw cycle that has gone through, we've seen the roads and bridges in our state in a state of disrepair that I have not seen in my life, as crumbling infrastructure is found everywhere. We have crumbling underground infrastructure as well in our sewer and water systems, as was evident by the horrible crisis in Flint, Michigan. And as I travel throughout rural areas in Michigan, people are talking about the lack of broadband access, high-speed access, and what that means for the development in their communities. In fact, in one county that I was in, they said you can tell exactly who has high-speed internet and who doesn't by the new business formation and the new building that occurs in those areas with high-speed internet, and places without it do not see that kind of growth and development, particularly in rural areas. President Trump, when he campaigned in Michigan, brought up infrastructure, I believe, just about every single campaign stop he had in the state. The people of my state were very excited about that. In fact, when I came in, I was asked what would I look forward to working with President Trump on, and I thought it would be infrastructure. Democrats, we rolled up our sleeves. We came up with a comprehensive infrastructure plan. I remember President Trump talking about how he's a builder, he constructs things, he's going to work on infrastructure, and now he's abandoned it. In fact, the only plan that we actually saw was basically smoke and mirrors. We had a hearing before the Commerce Committee with 5 cabinet secretaries, unprecedented. 5 cabinet secretaries showed up, they identified the problem. They did an excellent job of identifying the problem, but not one of them could come up with any substantive ideas as to how we're going to pay for infrastructure improvements and make the kinds of changes that are so necessary. In fact, it basically shifted the entire burden of infrastructure onto local and state governments, which right now simply don't have those resources. This is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to the people of Michigan. I think it's unacceptable to the people in this country who realize that we cannot be a great country if we don't have world-class infrastructure. You need to have roads and bridges and high-speed internet and sewer systems and water systems that are world-class in order to be a world-class country. And with this failure, we're going to pay the price.
Questions for any of us? Yes, sir. Look, I introduced legislation in 1995 that said we should move the embassy. Every country should have the right to choose its capital. There's been a regrettable loss of life and violence, and both sides should aim to stop the violence.
Leader Schumer, you talked about ZTE and China. Why do you think that the president brought up that particular company, and do you think that there's an actual security risk to helping ZTE?
There's a huge security risk to allowing ZTE to continue. The withdrawal of American-made products to ZTE was done on a security basis, not even an economic basis. And for the president to back off when he seems to be so concerned with security and terrorism makes no sense whatsoever. I hope he will change. I've talked to some of the people in the administration, and some of them are arguing with him that he should keep the ban on ZTE. It was the first time we showed China that we were going to be tough and meant business. And it's begun to have an effect on China, and no sooner than that happens, the president backs off. Bad for American jobs, bad for American workers, and worst of all, bad for security in America to prevent terrorism and to prevent foreign powers from influencing us.
Leader McConnell a few minutes ago talked about how he was optimistic that there would be more cooperation. He thought there was progress being made on appropriations. I talked to some of the appropriators, they thought so too. Do you share that view?
Yes.
And what about this idea of the president suggesting the Senate stay in session?
Look, I think we have plenty of time to get our work done, and we aim to do it. Leader McConnell, myself, Chairman Shelby, Vice Chair Leahy had a very good meeting where we hope to get all of the appropriations bills done for the first time, to come to the floor on a bipartisan basis, to not block them, and to move forward. This gives us a lot of optimism, and I think we can get it done. Yes, I think we can get all the bills done by the time we have to, which is in September. Okay? I think we're going to have plenty of time to get done what we need to be done if everybody cooperates. Well, you know, they can't have it both ways. They can't brag that they put in more judges than anybody else and then at the same time say they're being obstructed. So they ought to figure out where they're at.
So regarding the embassy, do you now consider this a settled issue, and would you urge future presidents, including Democratic?
I've always believed, I urged President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, and President Trump to move the embassy because Israel should decide where its capital is, and I continue to do that with every president.
There's all the talk about rescission from the White House, and especially Republicans in the other chamber. Does that make you
Yeah, I think the rescissions, they do real damage. The CHIP program's very important. That money might be needed in an emergency. The rescissions will help us get the appropriations process done, because often the money that's not spent in previous years are used for pay-fors. So to go forward with these rescissions, to bow to the right wing after they voted for a $1.5 trillion deficit-causing tax increase, will hurt the ability of the appropriations process to move forward. Last one. Senator Stabenow and Senator Roberts are working on a bipartisan bill, and I think that bill will have a lot better chance of becoming law than the one the House is working on.
Could I just add one
Yeah,
thing
please.
to that? As a member of the Ag Committee, for years the Farm Bill has been bipartisan. It has been an important source of food programs, but it's also involved the biggest conservation efforts that we do on a national level every year. And then finally, of course, the farm provisions. And when you go back in time, the Senate has been very bipartisan about this. Senator Roberts and Stabenow have done all hearings together, including in each other's states, and we are ready to go. I think the prediction is we get something done in June. I know that the House Farm Bill has become very partisan. We don't see a sign of that in the Senate, and in fact, Colin Peterson, the Democratic leader of the Ag Committee in the House, has said that he is endorsing and supporting what we're doing in the Senate. So we hope we will be able to produce a bill at a time when farm prices are incredibly volatile, when rural America has had ups and downs and all kinds of problems as identified with rural broadband and other things. It's time to get this done, and that's what we believe.
Thank you, everybody.